Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. Another $1 deal and another big shake-up for the New Zealand media industry. Sky TV has snapped up Broadcast Network 3 and its associated platforms and will have control of them by August 1st. It sees the exit of another international player in the local media landscape, with Warner Brothers Discovery retreating a year after it closed down 3's news outfit, Newshub. So what does this new media merger mean for the industry? And could this change how you watch the All Blacks? Today on The Front Page, host of the Fold podcast for the Spinoff, Duncan Grieve is with us to discuss how this shakes things up. Duncan, how shocked were you about this news?
I don't think shocked is the right word, because there'd been a sort of a slow drifting together and rise in the idea for a while, but a lot of things get floated around and are rumoured that never actually come to anything. So not shocked, but certainly surprised and just excited, because I think this industry needs some dynamism and needs a level of competition, and 3 and Sky just make sense together. Sometimes you see things come together and you're like, I don't know about that, but this, you're like, okay, this makes sense. And so what it does for the sort of energy, the dynamism, the level of competition within the industry, that was the kind of the big thing that kind of just jumped out to everyone as soon as it happened.
Right, so when you say competition in the industry, you're meaning TVNZ. Are they worried?
I think, well, look, I haven't spoken to anyone at TVNZ yet, and
Should they?
Well, I'm sure if I did, they would say that, no, this is great, we welcome competition. I know the line. It's kind of why sometimes I don't even bother to ask. But I think fundamentally TVNZ has always been number one. It's always had a huge share of audience, but more than that, it's even had a bigger share of the advertising market. You know, it makes roughly $300 million in advertising revenue versus around 100 for 3. But Sky is sort of rapidly gaining there. It's put a lot of emphasis on that. And if you just drop $100 million in ad revenue, not to make it all about the commercial or all about the ads, but it just puts them on a much more even footing. And fundamentally, I don't think this is any kind of existential challenge for TVNZ, but what we do have here is 2 much more balanced and well-matched opponents in the local TV market than we've probably had in quite some time.
Right, so a $1 deal, or is it really? I mean, they're not actually buying, like, people will see that and then it's like, well, I've got a couple of bucks. I could have brought that up to 5 on Trade Me. What does it actually mean when a company buys another company for $1, say?
As far as I know, there is an actual transaction. You do walk into, and it's a bit of a photo op, you hand over the dollar coin kind of thing. But obviously that is a symbolic gesture. It says we will take on the company as a going concern, including, and I think this is the major thing, all of the ongoing contracts. You know, that 3 has been a loss-making enterprise viewed in isolation for quite some time. That said, people have always thought it could be more than it currently is. That's why it sold for, you know, what I understand to be US $20 million, you know, less than 5 years ago. But it's kind of been a bit of an orphan. Like it had been with a radio company. It's never quite had the scale to properly compete with a TVNZ. And now that it's next to this subscription beast with like 1 million customers that is Sky, a real powerhouse in sports, Sky already spends more money on content than anyone else. It's now just got another place to look at, to put it, and a place that people are used to spending a lot of time with and that they really love. So it's a whole new canvas for Sky to put its content on and to kind of, you know, sort of see what free to air at real scale looks like for that company.
So if we wanted to get into it, why does Sky want 3? We know that 3, or why 3 would want Sky. But why the other way around?
To tie a bow on your earlier question, like they could have got more money for it than $1, but they wanted it to go to a good home. That can be like a corporate reputation thing. Sometimes it's actually they just really do care about the people, and they still, WBD still operate in this market. They've still got a production house here. They've still got the HBO Max brand, which is currently also sort of effectively leased to Sky. So they want to be part of the industry here. So just selling it to whoever is the highest bidder, irrespective of whether they're a responsible owner, that's a different thing. So I don't think that they'd want to be in that business. In terms of why Sky would want it, Sky for the longest time was a sort of castle on the hill. It wasn't really part of the New Zealand media industry. It had a totally different business model, which was subscriptions and advertising. It just wasn't a big part of what it did. It almost didn't need to be. It was so profitable without it that it and part of what you were paying for was a different kind of TV, that TV which had much less ads on it than the terrestrial free-to-air TV that you're used to. Now the game has changed. Everyone from Netflix on down is doing not just subscriptions but ads as well. And so for Sky, which has already got a great subscription business, it's already trying really hard in ads and has been making progress there when a lot of people are flat to declining. This just opens up a whole lot more audience and $100 million worth of advertising revenue that it can plug into its subscription and content portfolio. So it's kind of a no-brainer for them.
So they come on board, Sky does, and they will presumably do a whole bunch of cost cutting, as they normally do. There'll be some back office functions at 3 that Sky's already doing. All that sort of stuff will happen.
You'd imagine that kind of thing. I mean, we're driving in there, but they're saying that this would result in a sustainable EBITDA uplift of at least $10 million from financial year 2028. So they are looking quite some years out before they're really seeing the gains of this. But I guess if you're thinking in a bigger sense that sports rights play a big part in how people make money out of broadcasting, and if you've got a free-to-air option that you can offer.
Cut TVNZ out.
That's the one.
See you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Is it all about rugby when it comes to Sky? I mean, I've had a chat with some people around the office. They say, why do you still subscribe to Sky? Back home we call something similar like Foxtel. Why would you still have a subscription to Foxtel when you've got all of these other options? And one of the main things is sport, rugby, international rights for football, or AFL pops up on the screen sometimes, Sky Sport 9 or something. What happens to all of those? Like, is that going to be a real game changer for them?
Live sport is the last great driver of TV audiences. You can get hits here and there, and there are lots of properties which still work. But in the US, for example, something like 90 of the 100 biggest TV audiences of the year are NFL games, live NFL games. And so absolutely for Sky, while it's not the only thing, rugby, cricket, these kind of properties are a huge part of what makes Sky a very sticky product. For the person paying the bill, there's no other way to see it, and certainly not a good way to see it live. And that's where I think, from looking at the competitive dynamic with TVNZ, where it gets really interesting, because TVNZ's got a big newsroom. 3 famously shut its newsroom down last year. It's got a really good library of New Zealand content and ongoing shows and personalities that people are really familiar with. But what it doesn't have as much of is sport. And in fact, what sport it has, for example, the New Zealand cricket contract is actually going from TVNZ to Sky. So you're going to see a really big change in what is available to 3. It's got all of it, the Sky Sports contracts. I won't want to give too much away for free because then people wouldn't subscribe to Sky, but certainly it can put live sport there or even delayed sport, and that's a real differentiator from TVNZ. But it also has like the HBO Max contract. It has a whole bunch of really premium TV. again, probably won't be a first run there, but it can play it out, weeks or months later. And what the channel is to consumers has the potential to change in quite a positive way that will give TVNZ a real, well-resourced and differentiated competitor in a way that probably has never dealt with before.
What's the point of media companies merging? Now, I can't think of any really good examples off the top of my head, but I'm thinking like Disney owns, I don't know, everything now, like Fox and stuff, right? Or is that the other one? I mean, this is why I'm asking you.
Yeah.
ESPN.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you've got the Fox side of things. They own a whole.
Oh no, you're right. They do.
Well.
They
own Fox now.
They own Fox, not Fox News, but Fox, the 20th Century Fox.
20th Century Fox.
The sort of TV and movie studio business. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a media company. I kind of think of it visually, rolling along and just collecting up all of these smaller companies to a point where it's just this huge blob of content and news and money. Is there any point being one of those smaller blobs on the side anymore?
I think if you're a small blob, I love this the way you're describing this. The hard thing is that there are a lot of giant blobs around, and as big as we think of a company like Disney, they're right next to Netflix, which is now a significantly bigger blob, at least from a market capitalization standpoint. But even Netflix, which is like a $500 billion US company, it's looking up at Google, which is, YouTube is bigger again in terms of audiences, and then it has all its other businesses. Meta has a huge share of the sort of social video market. So the market for people's attention is dominated by a few enormous players, and they have huge structural advantages. The likes of YouTube and Meta, they don't buy content in advance, they don't commission it, it just sort of comes to them. And that's a huge structural advantage for them. YouTube actually shares a lot with its creators, which Meta doesn't do, but there is just a scale and a business model thing there that is really hard to beat. So if you're a small player, bundling a lot of different types of business together, because some of the back office, whether it's finance, HR, technology, that kind of stuff, the more channels and audiences that you can spread that across, your ad sales, the more you can spread those things across, the better your little blob has a chance of surviving against the really big blobs that are headquartered in Silicon Valley, have their nominal finances run out of Dublin and pay tax precisely nowhere for the most part.
In terms of media companies like this merging, what does it mean for creatives? I did see that Sky TV CEO say that they are interested in more local content, and that's obviously something that they've heard from all the comments and stuff regarding Netflix taking our dime, and but people have been saying Netflix should pay a tax so we can create more New Zealand content, and that really stuck out to me from listening to her about that. Do you believe that it will lead to that?
Well, I think if you think about content in a very broad sense, Sky probably makes more local content than anyone else because of the amount of sport it produces. And then there's all the wraparound sports shows. We don't tend to think about that in the production sector, which is where a lot of that sort of the drums beating around Netflix's commissioning locally comes from. They don't typically think about sports, but Sky screens and produces and has hardworking people who go all over the country to bring you NPC and all kinds of different sports properties. They also, through New Zealand On Air and through some commercial partnerships, make some local content as well, but not nearly so much as the likes of TVNZ, for example. 3 has massively pulled back from that itself. It used to have multiple news bulletins. Now it just has the one. It doesn't make it itself. Stuff manufactures that for them. So they have basically retrenched to the point where they said the only local content we'll make will either be funded by New Zealand On Air or be commercially funded. Whether that remains the case for the combined Sky 3 business, I do think that's an open question. If you look at the battle of the big blobs again, what's a differentiator for our local blobs? It is where they are. And they can't go anywhere else. The likes of Sky and TVNZ are in and of this country. And how do you signal that? And how do you differentiate yourself from the likes of Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, Netflix? It is actually with your local content. So that's the sort of the upside too, and the argument for them commissioning more local shows in future.
I guess the 3 brand has always been seen as a bit of a renegade, hey, up against the corporate and very serious TVNZ. That's where you get the serious things. And when TV3, and especially I'm thinking 3 News, came into the play, it was much more fun. It was a bit out there. My producer actually told me about this iconic footage of Belinda Todd taking the Grim Reaper through the office when the network was in its infancy.
It's the same reception that's been here since the beginning.
You've come about the jobs.
The same reception that hosted host Belinda Todd, along with the Grim Reaper, when TV3 went into receivership.
Kia ora, I'm Tūkroirangi Morgan. You can have me for $1,000 a week, plus all the land that was taken from my tribe.
The receivathon was just a month after Nightline launched.
We're just running with scissors, with our hair on fire, and no one expected anything of it. So we did what we liked.
And there have been so many owners over the years, so much change at 3. Do you think this deal is going to bring some long-term stability, not only to 3, but perhaps the wider media landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think that renegade spirit of 3 was very deliberately cultivated. It was a classic challenger brand, and it hired personalities who had a particular sense of fun and playfulness, and it was just so well executed against that over its sort of first 20 years or so, to the point where if you look at some of the biggest names on TVNZ, the likes of Hilary Barry and John Campbell, they were 3 lifers before they eventually made their way across there. Not that they wanted to be a development house for talent, but that's just sort of, it shows just how admired they were at that capacity. In terms of how 3 has lived its whole life, it has had huge amounts of debt, it's had reluctant owners, it's had bankruptcies, and it's just kept on trucking. That's their understanding of the world, is that way up there, something weird's always happening, and you just got to do your job. And so, there was, my understanding is that TVNZ went and camped outside Flower Street, which is only going to be their home for a matter of a few days, I think, for 3, to sort of get their reaction to this. And I'm like, you should know that this is the most normal thing that's happened to 3 from an ownership perspective in probably its entire existence. And so it will have, I would have thought, no impact on them kind of emotionally, but equally, if you sort of step back a bit, it's obviously a great day for them. I think when you're owned by a giant multinational, especially when you're off to the side of what their core business is, you should never really count your chickens. But when you're owned by a publicly listed New Zealand media company, you're part of the furniture there. You're a really important asset to them. And I think that for 3 staff, those who are left, a lot of them have gone by the wayside in recent years. But those who are still there, especially those who've got a kind of connection back to previous eras, this should be an amazing moment for them, because they're finally at a place where they're sort of seen and valued and have reason to believe that they can grow and prosper and evolve in a way that has been really hard to imagine for a lot of the last sort of probably 10, 15 years.
In the past, TVNZ has poached some of 3's biggest hits, I've been told. Home and Away is probably the biggest. That was the lead-in show for the 6 p.m. news for a long time there. And you've also seen, they announced the other week that Graham Norton is moving over to TVNZ. They even took Broken Wood Mysteries from Sky, did TVNZ. So is this stronger media company perhaps going to put up a little bit more of a fight?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of those shows that you listed weren't necessarily poached from 3 so much as 3 either deliberately or unintentionally botched the negotiation on them, and they were real losses. Some of those, particularly Home and Away, were real, tent poles of how they set up their evening. And, also give TVNZ credit, they knew how to behave in a competitive environment like a really strong competitor. They still will be in this situation. I think it's less about 3 defending what it has, and it still has a lot. David Lomas is still a very beloved property for them. Married at First Sight Australia regularly tops the ratings. Basically, comedy and reality TV as locally made genres were largely driven strategically by 3. And while particularly the comedy side and some of the reality side, TVNZ's picked up on it, they were definitely fast followers rather than originators of that. And so, there's absolutely a more robust company to sort of defend what 3 has. But I think what's more instructive and interesting about this deal is if you just look at the vast library that Sky has, truly, it's one of the best in the world. It might be the best in the world just because we're a sort of small market with less pay TV operators across sports, across entertainment. What it can do in terms of putting some of that, a sampling of that on 3, and then using that as the top of the funnel to say, if you like that, there's a whole lot more where that came from across Sky's properties, and then advertising that there. Once that's all properly put together, strategically understood and executed, that should be a pretty formidable machine for them, setting aside the whole advertising piece of it, which is the obvious stated justification too.
Thanks for joining us, Duncan.
Thank you so much for having me. I could talk about this all day.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Ethan Sills and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.